Okay, thank you. I want to thank all four of you for taking some time out to have a conversation with me here on some really important topics in the community college system. The Community College Board does put out every year an underrepresented groups report that is an important annual statutory responsibility of the community colleges, and the Board of Higher Ed does a similar thing for the universities. And the report includes a collection of best practices from across the system that are really aimed at increasing graduation rates and closing the achievement gap and the equity gap for students of color, women, individuals with disabilities, and first-generation students. Best practices in this context address many factors that are woven into students' experiences that may impact their success and completion and provide helpful information for the system. And a number of topics are covered just in our 2019 report. For example, we had colleges that address student support, emergency financial assistance, food pantries, TRIO student services, adult education, workforce development, and on and on. I mean, it's really a nice list of programs. And I do want to thank each of you as we focus on three strategies and initiatives highlighted within the report, represented at the two of your colleges and at the partnership. And we have Dr. Lori Suddick from College of Lake County joining us, Dr. Stephen Nacco from Danville Area Community College, and Kyle Westbrook, the Executive Director of the Partnership for College Completion. So I'm going to ask you a few questions and give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the projects that were highlighted in our last report. Lori, in 2015, the College of Lake County implemented the Exito Student Success Program to help recent high school graduates of Latinx origin. Can you talk to us a little bit about the impetus for the development of that program and how it has contributed to the achievement gap or closing the achievement gap for Latino students?
Yeah, and actually I'll give credit to our Latino Outreach and Success Committee, who really have been the energy and drive behind the Exito programming, its development. But back in 2015, the committee really sought to find new solutions that could help achieve or help close the gap for graduation rates for Latino students. And it was really focused on full-time, first-time degree-seeking students. Although over those 5 years, the program has certainly been open to any of the students. Over the 5 years, the program has grown, doubled from initially about 150 students to over 300 first-time, full-time students, with actually about 700 students participating altogether. The program was designed initially to be focused on first-year experience and onboarding to help students navigate the college experience. And it, over time, has expanded to follow students through their entire experience. And its core focus was transitioning and navigating the college experience, but most importantly, providing a cultural connection for students. So for the students, it provides that sense of belonging through a culturally relevant connection with others, personal development, mentorship, navigating that college journey, which is focused both on the parent and the student. And then it has some wraparound support resources to it. So that's kind of, the program started to address that achievement gap. It sought to do so through a culturally relevant model. And those are the elements that are integrated into it. The benefits that have been seen through the program demonstrate that it has, for Exito students, their 3-year graduation rate and their fall to spring retention rates are better than the non-Exeter students. So for example, the retention rates are generally about 8% higher for fall to spring retention for the Exeter students than non. And the graduation rate, we've only had one cohort graduate, but the graduation rate for Exeter students was 32% as compared to 24% of the non. The problem in that is while those benefits of engagement, culturally relevant inclusiveness, what we're not seeing is that it's actually achieving the closing of the big gap. And through our journey now, as we embark with the Illinois Equity and Attainment Initiative, where we've really put together an equity plan, and our engagement in achieving the dream, we know that doing things that touch only some students doesn't achieve big closure of the gap for students. And so now our work really is, our working theory is that because this program lives kind of in that boutique program model, touching some of our students, so 300 of what is over 3,600 students that should be touched. We're looking to build out what we call our Lancer Success Framework, which is a systemic, full-scale, integrated model that will ensure that every student is touched, because we are trying to live in that mindset of every student can succeed in the right environment with the right supports. We believe strongly, as is written in our student success definition, that we want to provide a student-ready, inclusive environment that provides a culturally relevant and personalized experience grounded in equitable practice. So the things we're going to retain out of the existing model, because that's where the benefits have lived, is that culturally relevant experience and that connection for the sense of belonging. But we're now going to expand it to be a fully integrated system within our restructured onboarding first-year experience design that will ensure that every student of the Latinx population is integrated into this wraparound support system that is culturally relevant and gives them that sense of belonging and connection. So that's kind of the journey as we have it today, in a brief overview, and I'm sure I'll have a chance to talk about other elements as we move through the rest of our time.
Yeah, and a great example of moving from a boutique program to scaling across campus. I think that's fantastic. Dr. Nacco, if you wouldn't mind, I know similarly in the fall of 2018, Danville launched the MSWIFT program to address equity gaps for African-American males. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the MSWIFT initiative is and how it has contributed to closing equity gaps there in Danville?
Well, MSWIFT was an acronym, a kind of a crazy acronym for a whole series of ideas that emerged a couple of years before through our Chief Diversity Officer, Carla Boyd, who had spent time with a program called Getting Ahead, working with mainly low socioeconomic families in the Section 8 housing. And Getting Ahead was the idea of they can have a better life if it's not education through a lot of other things. So through that emerged this idea of MSWIFT. Now MSWIFT, which was launched in the fall of 18, like Dr. Suddick, the focus was primarily on African-American first-time, full-time fall students. And it was an unqualified failure. And the reason it was, so we're smaller numbers, so we had about 25 in this cohort who were African-American male. Their graduation rate was about less than half of the overall average, which at the time was 38% for overall students for first-time, full-time fall. So we had to do something, and we're achieving the Dream College and things like that. So led by our Chief Diversity Officer, we recruited the students in the fall of 18. And MSWIFT as an acronym meant that there are certain components to it. The students would get mentored. They would be part of a cohort with social, so that was the S, the social work together. Wraparound services, we found out that, not a big surprise, it wasn't just college, but it was also life problems that they needed services. As Danville Area Community College oversees the American Job Center, we could help with food stamps, SNAP program, we could help with rental assistance and some of that. So it was the wraparound. Intrusive intervention, that was the I. That was where we had to find out how they were really doing in class, not just take their word for it. So we would have people who would intrusively intervene. We would give financial help, financial aid. That was what was the F. And the T part of it was really just what we were getting in, something we had been doing here for many years, as again with you mentioned earlier, the TRIO program, the tutoring and personal help in there. So that was MSWIFT, but it was an unqualified failure because we started off with 25 and we wound up with 1 student. And the lesson we learned there from MSWIFT was that we really didn't do what, there's famous lawyer, Harvard taught, but he went down to Alabama and he helped people with, who were on death row. His name is Brian Stevenson, and he did a movie called Just Mercy, which is a marvelous movie. And the theme there, and also in a talk he gave that we attended, that Ms. Boyd and I, called through the Global Leadership, I guess it's a Global Leadership Forum, they have them every August. And he was on and he said, if you're really going to be able to help people, you need to get proximate with them. And that means you have to live with them. So when Harvard lawyer Brian Stevenson went down and lived in Alabama and lived with the people he was trying to help, that's how he learned in the movie, in his book, and in his lectures. So we tried the same thing. We had to live with them. And it began then by the fall of 19, where not me, but Carla Boyd and our head of student services, Stacy Eman, and a couple of other people went and visited the families, almost like you're recruiting star athletes. You go, you meet the families, you see where they live, you spend time with them before the semester even starts, and then help them understand that you're going to be part of a group that's going to work together. So the MSWIFT then became, in the fall of 19, what we call the toolbox. And these are basically the same elements of MSWIFT, but it was all together. It was being proximate and having the students together. So that went 19 into 20, and our retention it was 22. We had 20 of the 22 were with us in the spring of 20. And then everything unraveled. And right now, out of that first cohort, thanks to COVID and a lot of other things, a few of them are working. We've got 11 left of that first cohort who are who returned in the fall, went the fall and then into who are registered now in the spring. So 11 from that first. We started a second cohort of the toolbox in the fall of 20. And I don't even know right now how we're doing. It's very scary. So that's where we are.
So a good example of starting a program and learning some lessons and making the changes necessary to be successful. And I know that we do have on our list of questions to think about COVID. So I think you've touched on some of that, but I do want to hear from Kyle first. And we heard Dr. Suddick already mention the Equity Attainment Initiative that the partnership has led, and we hear nothing but good things about it in the state. But I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what you've done and how this is contributing to elimination of equity gaps and some of the work that you've done with the colleges here. And you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. So the Illinois Equity Attainment Initiative is a program offered by us at the Partnership for College Completion that was launched in the fall of 2018. And it was launched with myself and Lisa Castillo Richmond, our managing director, and we spent the better part of about 4 months going around and talking to a lot of college and university leaders to understand what could a third party, what could a nonprofit like us, what role could we play in helping to elevate student success, champion student success, and specifically champion equity issues on college campuses. And it was very clear, a couple of things that stood out in those conversations. One was that there was a lot of really good work happening in pockets throughout the state, but it wasn't coordinated in any way, and there wasn't sort of a backbone that was coordinating that. And so what we then set about to do was to build a cohort of colleges and universities that would first sort of publicly pledge to close their equity gaps in degree completion, specifically for low-income students, students of color. And then those colleges, universities then put together a pretty senior team that would collaborate with our equity project managers, folks on our staff, to really look at what are the ways that we can collectively be doing that. It's my coffee maker. And as a result of that, that first cohort was, I think, 25. We're now up to 29 colleges, universities, slightly more community colleges than four-year universities, most in the Chicago area. But one of the things that we're excited about in 2021 is to think about how do we expand the reach of equity to include more institutions from outside of the Chicago area. And the work really centers around bringing college and university leadership teams together at least twice a year in what we call our fall and spring equity summits, hearing from national leaders, folks from all over the country that have done this work, that have closed their gaps, are in the process of closing their gaps, and what lessons can be learned for our respective colleges and universities. And another key part of that work has been each of the colleges, universities, like College of Lake County, have put together with some support from our team an equity plan. And that is really the roadmap. So it's not enough to simply say we're going to close our equity gaps on campus, but what's the roadmap? How are you going to get there? And then specifically to Lori's point, what are the big bets? What are the things that can move beyond kind of boutique flavored programs, which there's certainly an important role that those programs play, but what are the ways that in some ways the structures need to be changed? And if there's one message that our young people have been out in the streets talking about over this summer and this fall, it's been about systems that need to be reformed. And so there's a couple of things that have emerged from the equity plans that were published back in August. I think 22 of the institutions have published their equity plans, and they're available on our website at partnershipfcc.org. A couple of things that have emerged in terms of that sort of systems level approach to closing equity gaps is institutions that are saying, look, we are really going to drill down to understand how we're advising students and how we can really restructure and rethink how we're advising students. Another thing that's emerged in those equity plans is institutions saying, well, we are going to really drill into how we're doing developmental education. And there are a range of practices and a range of solutions that are out there, but we've been really excited with the institutions and sort of saying, let's look at what are the things that are going to give us the maximum opportunities for not just Black and Brown students, but all students to be able to improve their success rates.
Well, thank you, Kyle. And that's all really fantastic work. And again, we hear nothing but great things about the ILEA work. We're gonna go back. I'm going to go back around the horn. And I want to be mindful of time. So Kyle, if you could continue and talk a little bit about what you've heard from colleges about COVID's impact on their equity work, and what advice would you give to community college leaders as they try to adapt to this new environment?
Yeah, I think back in the spring, one of the things that we did is, we were in regular contact in March and April with our ILEA contacts on campus, and won't surprise anyone that the emerging needs around sort of basic needs that students were facing and continue to face. And I suspect that at Danville, as you said, you don't know what's happening with what's happening in their program. I suspect that just the immediate needs that students have. And if mom and dad got laid off, and so now I have to pick up an additional shift at work, and that's obviously going to impact my ability to take a full load of classes. So we heard a lot about just students really struggling, and institutions really going above and beyond to help support those students and through those challenges, and emergency grants. And it's something that we'll continue to push in the legislature, is the need for state appropriations for emergency funds for students, because we know that sometimes those $400, $500 expenses can often mean the difference between a student staying enrolled or a student just needing to stop out in order to take care of life. And then another thing that we've have heard, and obviously the clearinghouse data that was just recently published shows folks were fearful over the summer of precipitous declines in enrollment, but we know, of course, the steepest declines in enrollment according to the clearinghouse data, and there's no reason to suggest or no reason to think that Illinois is any different than the nation, have been among African American students, Native American students, and to a slightly lesser extent, Latinx students. And so, the question really becomes, again, sort of back to the systems level. What are the things that can and should be happening at the state level, especially now with new funds coming from the federal government, that can ensure that that student that is teetering on the edge of of having to make that tough decision about stopping out of college, to ensure that that student has the resources to continue their path, because we know what happens when students stop out. I mean, we know what the data suggests, and we know they don't return. We know they don't return, certainly in the time that we would like to see happen. And so I think, in terms of advice for colleges, universities, I think one of the things that we've seen the greatest success is the colleges, universities really leaning in on their local resources. There are folks in all of our communities that may not be able to write $100,000 checks, but can write a $500 check, and that $500 check means the world to our students. And so we know that the challenge is global, but the solutions are very, very local, especially when it comes to our community colleges.
Thanks, Kyle. Well put. Dr. Nacco, COVID, and what advice do you have for folks in this environment? And you're on mute.
I never wanted to be one of those people, but I guess I am. No, it's almost like a Sisyphus-like thing where you think you get the rock to the top and then you get crushed. But Kyle just hit it right on the head. I mean, we can use local help for these students, and sometimes we understand stop outs are a problem, but this is a whole different stop out. It's what you just identified. It's my parents, or my one parent is unemployed and I've got to go to work. So then what do we as a college do to accommodate that student? One of the things you can try, if you've never tried before, give them a Saturday class that never existed. We're calling them Saturday six packs. Come in 6 Saturdays and you can do your 3-credit class. Just find some way to connect them. Through the American Job Center and through great WIOA funding, they're getting the funds. And also the CARES Act has helped us buy the technology. So when they need, whether synchronously or asynchronous through a learning management system like we use Blackboard, we're giving them technology. So we're able to give them mobile hotspots, we're able to give them laptops. but we also have to just understand that some of them need what you were talking about, just the personal mentoring, counseling, and M-SWIFT, but then Toolbox, the mentoring is, we have in Vermilion County, we have 148 churches, and all of them with ministers who want to help. So we have no shortage of ministers looking to mentor some of our, or particularly our African-American male students, and say, what do you need? Let's be proximate with you. Let's find out from your viewpoint what you need, and then do that. So I don't have the answers. It is unraveling, but we're not quitting. I could say that, Dr. Durham. Okay, we're not quitting.
And now I was on mute. Dr. Suddick, any final advice or thoughts about how you've had to adapt to COVID?
Yeah, the things I would add to what's already been said, and certainly having our specific to the Exito program, having this alliance of people who've built relationships with students certainly served as a great lever for us to be a conduit of critical connection in communication and support and assessment of the students to determine what their needs are and how we could most quickly meet them. But organizationally, related to our equity work and closing gaps altogether, the thing we've really tried to be intentional through this COVID experience is really taking that equity lens and applying it to the decisions we're having to make, so that we're not repeating the past of inadvertently creating barriers or unfilling some needs while overfilling others. So, we made some policy changes just before COVID occurred, when it was around our drop for non-payment policy. And so COVID gave us a great opportunity to really evaluate how that was going, and ensuring that we were disaggregating the data in, was that policy change benefiting all students and not just portions. And we were very pleased with what we saw in that evaluation in terms of benefiting students. And so now we're advancing that agenda. But also, there are, as Dr. Nacco mentioned, there are changes we're making right now as we're living in this adaptive solutions world. And many of these changes would have taken us years to get to before. And so now it's giving us an opportunity to call the question, of the things we're changing, what should we continue to sustain? Because we are clearly seeing benefit to our students of color because of these changes, because it's eliminated barriers that have existed and were built out of those systemic exclusionary practices that we're all kind of designed around. So we're trying to be very disciplined in maintaining that equity lens as we evaluate what we've had to do to adapt to the current environment. But in some cases, it's caused a good effect. And so how can we very deliberately maintain the good effects as we step out of this COVID environment at some point in the near future, I hope.
Go ahead.
I feel like a little more in ways. You just, Dr. Suddick triggered something. Yeah, we make some really dumb assumptions, and we've got to change the way we think about it. What we've got here, we're thinking about how come we have a Section 8 housing, and it's 80% African American. It's less than a mile from the college. How come we have so few of the people there who come here, and then we find out, oh, it might be less than a mile, but the bus trip takes 45 minutes because they drive all the way out to the prison. So what are you going to do to try to get the people, to get the education to people? So one of the things was we put a classroom right in the middle of that complex, Section 8 housing, and we started to run jitney buses back and forth. So you've got to think differently, and we make these assumptions based on, maybe past practice, maybe just what we think is a good idea. But unless you really live it with them, ride that bus, you don't know. That's it. I'm done being Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you. No, I think that's a great point. And I think back to Kyle's words, and here I am at the state, but I'm going to say, the state has a lot to offer, but locally, certainly there is so much more for folks to draw upon. And I encourage you to continue to do that. So I want to congratulate all of you on the good work that you're doing. I think that's fantastic. And thank you for being available for a few minutes here today. The things that that you are discussing really fit very well with one of our goals at the board, which is to support minority, first generation, and low income students across urban, rural, and suburban communities as we try to emphasize evidence-based practices to address some of these equity issues and equity gaps as well. We're going to continue our focus on that, and I know you will continue yours. And again, I want to congratulate you on your great work and thank you for taking the time out today.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.